My name is Nick, and welcome to my channel where I like to talk about scary stuff. Sound of Violence follows Alexis, a young woman studying and experimenting with sound after a traumatic event awakened synesthetic abilities within her, allowing her to see sound. This euphoric experience only occurs when she hears the sounds of violence pushing her down a dark and dangerous path. I'm gonna keep this spoiler-free for as long as humanly possible before giving you my grade, and then I'm gonna need to unload with full spoilers. This is a really interesting concept, and I honestly had never even heard of synesthesia before watching this movie, and I think it acts as the perfect launchpad for a horror project. And it's especially interesting because our main character Alexis lost her hearing as a child and then regained it after this violent event. During this process, her synesthesia is triggered, and we get a taste of what our character is searching for. And then we jump to her adult life where we see her trying to recreate that magic, but obviously she isn't going to be able to unless she gets serious and does some murders. Jasmine Savoy Brown plays our lead with a sense of warmth that I felt was lacking throughout the rest of the film. Horror stories about characters dealing with trauma always work for me, and I was ready to see Alexis crunch some bones and mix some sick beats. Unfortunately, it did not play out as well as I had hoped. The violence in the film is fun if you separate it from everything else. It's gory, it's ridiculous, it's disturbing, it's everything you want it to be. The problem is that the scenes of violence don't tonally match up with the rest of the movie, and it ends up creating this very uneven experience. My biggest problem with the film is that we're following Alexis for the majority of it, even as things get crazy for her character, and then we're supposed to shift to Marie, her best friend played by Lily Simmons, about 3/4 of the way through. Alexis goes from complicated anti-hero to full-on villain, and I was rooting for her. I was on her side when all of a sudden the movie wanted to demonize her. I do think there's an interesting arc for our main character at the center of this story, and I kind of appreciate the way that it was pulled off, but I don't think that it fit in with the rest of the story in a cohesive manner. For the concept, I'm gonna give Sound of Violence a 4 out of 5 because I think this is a really fun way to explore synesthesia in horror, but they really didn't stick the landing. For execution, I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 5 because I feel like they had a very strong premise to work with, but the entire movie felt a little disjointed to me. Like, at times it felt like actors weren't even acting in the same scenes with one another, and the way that the violence was used in this film felt completely out of place for a film that's so heavily focused on violence as a story element. For entertainment value, I'm gonna give it a 2.5 out of 5 because I was along for the ride for the most part, but as the horror elements kicked into full gear, it all fell apart to me. As for my personal grade, I'm gonna give Sound of Violence a 2.5 out of 5. It has some interesting character beats and entertaining kills, but it ultimately doesn't amount to much. So now I want to get into full spoilers, and if you haven't already seen the movie and you don't want to hear more, well then get the hell out of here, because I feel the need to explain the level of buffoonery on display in this movie. It really should have been a slam dunk, and instead they ended up giving Spiral a run for their money in terms of failed execution. Let's go all the way to the beginning to really dig into this. So Alexis is a child who has recently lost her hearing because of something, and her father is a veteran with some serious mental health issues, and one night he basically snaps and kills most of the family, and this is when Alexis is forced to defend herself in order to survive. And as she attacks her dad, her synesthesia is awakened, and she ends up, seeing the sound of the meat tenderizer smashing her dad's face, and she's like, ooh, I'm into this. It's basically just like me discovering horror films as a kid. Totally different, but kind of similar. Shortly after that traumatic event, she regains her hearing, and then we jump to her as an adult, as she's working as a music professor's assistant or something at a university, but she's also working on her side project. And this is when we're introduced to her friend Marie. They're recording together. They go to see a dominatrix and her client, and they're recording the dominatrix whip the submissive man, and right off the bat, Alexis is like full-blown crazy. She wants to draw blood from this man, and as soon as Marie calls her out for being a total freak of nature, Alexis snaps at her and she's like, I'll let you know when I'm done. I kind of appreciated this because we start out with Alexis already at the deep end, ready to plunge straight into the abyss. And you can tell that she's been thinking about this for a while, but it isn't entirely a nuanced take. What I don't believe even a tiny bit is what happens when Alexis starts to get violent, you know, in order to turn this into a horror film. We learn this information later on. It should have been established, I think, a little earlier, but all she has left from her family is this rusty old RV and a garage space, I guess, this like massive garage. Anyway, we see her working in the RV. That's where she mixes her music and stuff. But she takes her first victim, this homeless man, to this garage that I guess she has. And she has this jigsaw-style murder trap set up there. She puts the dude in this seat that is surrounded by microphones, and it has all of these arms, like, attached to this apparatus that have hammers and knives. And she has this whole system hooked up so that he is stabbed and beaten to death as she records her Summer Hits album. Not only do I not believe for an instant that Alexis built this trap contraption thing, but I also don't believe that she would just leave it there. She just leaves the crime scene as is. Like, I'm sorry, okay, we get this detective character who is written like a robot from Mars, and she can't ever seem to nail what's going on during the time of death, or like find out who owns a single location where a body is found. It's ridiculous. You mean to tell me that Alexis owns this garage, yet the detective can't seem to get the records of who owns the garage where a dead homeless man was found? Are you suspending your disbelief enough? Because you're really gonna need to in order to get through this movie. And in the next act of violence, Alexis brings a singer to this recording booth where she straps these cords to his head and basically fries his brain until his head explodes. And it's always super fun when a head explodes. You blow up a head, we make a GIF. It's always a good time. But it is so stupid here because once again, Alexis just leaves the crime scene and the detective shows up doing her wonderful work, and someone is like, oh, whoever did this doused the place in bleach, we can't get a fingerprint. And I'm like, you mean to tell me that Alexis just spilled some bleach around and then just left the bloody corpse and everything else, and you can't find a single trace of her? I'm sorry, does no one ever keep a record of who they're renting the recording booth to? Like, you would think there would at least be some sort of a trail to follow there. The violence is fun on an aesthetic level, but it's so over the top that it clashes with the rest of the movie that is trying to seriously explore this character. And the fact that we start out rooting for the killer only to bitch out and go for a more formulaic route just feels like they weren't willing to stick to the premise. We need to get into my biggest issue with this film, because from the very beginning you can tell that there is some sort of romantic or sexual tension between Alexis and Marie. I honestly thought that they were dating right off the bat until it was made very clear to me that Marie is actually hooking up with this guy Duke, and they start out just hooking up, but then as things play out, they start to like each other a little more, which is obviously a problem for Alexis, who is totally in love with her best friend, but can't tell her, of course. Like, what is this, a goddamn 90s sitcom? So this is when things get really good, because Alexis has gone full Jigsaw, and not in terms of creativity, but just in terms of how convoluted the rest of this film is. Marie and Duke are going to this art gallery opening, and last minute, Alexis manages to set up this harp with these sharp wires, and also, don't let me forget this, also, she drugs the harpist so that this woman goes out to play the harp and she doesn't realize that she's slicing open her fingers while she's playing for the crowd. And it's very gross, it's very disturbing. Marie and Duke are the only ones who help this woman, and they end up saving her, which is cool. And now their bond is growing because they've been through trauma together. Isn't that adorable? Yeah, well, Alexis won't have that, so she ends up killing Duke's ass. And she doesn't even go through the trouble of putting together some elaborate contraption for him. She just straight up beats his ass to death with a hammer. I guess that is her signature move. And this is where things actually get problematic for me, because Alexis and Marie end up making out. They all of a sudden have their moment together after all of this. Finally, Alexis makes her move, and I guess also Marie is totally willing to just ditch Duke, even though we just spent the last like 20 minutes dealing with Marie and Duke falling in love. And immediately after they kiss, Marie ends up finding Duke's body in Alexis's RV and is like, wait, actually, you're a murderer. Why even go there if you're not even gonna actually do it? Like, if you can't write a developed relationship between these two characters, what is the point here? This could have easily been a story about two friends who are working together as one gets way into their own project and the other drifts away. It basically would be the same script without that weird tension that did not need to be there, because ultimately it just felt like it was playing into the predatory les trope. Yay, happy Pride Month. And I gotta say, I'm sorry, but I thought the ending was absolutely hilarious. So because Alexis can't have Marie, well then no one can, right? She's got to kill her somehow. And she ends up like cutting speakers and wires like into Alexis's body, like her arms and her stomach and stuff. She just has these speakers all over her. And then Alexis just like drops her off at the beach and is like, okay, goodbye. Alexis is walking around as everyone is freaking out around her as this music is playing, and Alexis just kind of, you know, walks off like listening to her violence music and then, you know, goes fully deaf, and that's it for her. But I was just like, wow, this is supposed to be this big moment, this big, like, wow moment, and it just felt like the dumbest way to kick off the summer. What did you think of Sound of Violence? Thank you so much for watching this video. I greatly appreciate it as always. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and Letterboxd for more movie recommendations. That's it for this video, but I won't stop you from watching another.